Hello and welcome to the Consistency Project Podcast. I'm Patrick Cummings, here as always with E.C. Sinkowski. Each week, we simplify the principles and practices of nutrition, health, and fitness that will help you perform better, feel better, and of course, live better. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hello, E.C.
Hey, what's going on?
Oh, we're just going to answer some listener questions.
Let's do it.
One of our quick bites where we take a bunch of, we take 5 questions. You try to answer them in about 5 minutes. We're usually pretty good at this. You've gotten this down pretty well. I always like to ask where or how or what's the best way if folks do have a question that they might want to get into an episode. What's the best, most efficient way?
Yes. OptimizeMeNutrition.com/email is how you join my email list, and you get a weekly newsletter. Weekly-ish. I would say it's gotten back on the weekly schedule.
I was waiting for the ish. I was waiting for the
period of time which was more ish. We're back to weekly. Yeah. But yeah, if you click a reply to any email I send out, it is the best way to get in the queue because I have a good way to store them, not Instagram.
Not Instagram. And I will say, sometimes the questions you get, we end up actually folding them into fuller episodes, or sometimes they're like, oh, you know what, there is a full episode in there. And sometimes they end up in an episode like this where questions are great, but perhaps they don't need 30 minutes. They just need 5 minutes for you to answer. So that's what we've got today. We've got 5 of them. You want to just jump right in?
Let's do it.
Cool. All right. First one's from Kate. Could you potentially cover the ingredient EPG? I know you've covered a variety of different artificial sweeteners, ingredients, but with the recent quote unquote drama surrounding the David Bar acquiring Epogy, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, Epogy, was the first I've heard about this ingredient. I'm super curious on the health benefits / risks with such a new additive and find it super interesting that a larger company didn't acquire it before David Bar, especially if it's as great as it seems. It is or was also an ingredient in Nick's ice cream bars, Gatsby chocolates, Wonder Spread, etc. We've talked about the David Bar before. Maybe we do a little reminder of what that even is.
Yeah, the David Bar is the protein bar led, I think, by Peter Attia. I forget now. I think it's also the founder of RX Bar, part
Peter
of the
Rahal.
team.
Yep.
Yeah, and we'll have to put the link to the show notes or the podcast episode in the show notes. I mean, I couldn't stop giggling about calling a protein bar the David Bar after, of course, the David statue in Italy, just suggesting the protein bar is crafted so expertly as the David statue.
Yeah. It's good branding, though. It's good branding, though.
I just keep giggling about it. It's so ridiculous. But anyway, it's a protein bar team. It's just a protein bar. Fine enough, can fit in a diet, can be part of a healthy diet. But yeah, so this question, the ingredient EPG, I learn a lot from questions, especially about what's going on in the news, because people are like, what's going on with this drama? I had no idea there was drama on it. So thank you, Kate. Figured out some drama about the EPG. So EPG is esterified propoxylated glycerol, and it's a fat alternative. It's basically a low-fat calorie replace it. And what they do is they modify plant-based oils like canola oil, and they create a substance that basically acts like fat in food in terms of kind of its texture and properties and taste, but has significantly fewer calories. And so they're able to do that by basically adding different molecules to the canola-like plant-based oil such that the enzyme lipase, which typically breaks down fat in our digestion, can no longer break it down. So this EPG will leave the GI tract essentially unaltered, and therefore you drastically reduce calories in food. I mean, the stat I saw is like reduces calories by 92%, and basically we end up getting about 0.7 calories per gram out of the EPG instead of the traditional 9 calories per gram. So yeah, it can be a great way to cut down on calories in food, but yet have the property and taste of fat. Now, EPG is classified as GRAS, or generally recognized as safe, which basically means it's not regulated like a food additive because there is or was at the time enough consensus by the experts that there was no safety concerns with it. And it received this ruling or designation back in 2015, which I think would have applied to protein bars. But then also in 2020, it was further expanded to other uses in the food market. So it really has been deemed to be safe for some time. I did find an article, I think it was around the 2015 timeframe, so potentially around when it was receiving its first ruling, that there was some concerns that it could interfere with fat-soluble vitamin absorption, because if we're not actually breaking down the fat, maybe we're not going to be absorbing any vitamins that need fat to be absorbed, but that has been unfounded. And there's also some concerns about digestive distress, namely diarrhea or having oil in your stools. For those of us that might remember Olestra, which is a fat alternative at the time, that was a big issue when you ate, let's say, a bag of chips that were made with the Olestra fat alternative. But here with EPG, that digestive distress doesn't seem to be an issue either, largely because it's more solid than a liquid. And so people that are having EPG in normal doses don't have this GI distress. And I was looking at it, like the David protein bar, which uses EPG, of course, assuming all of the fat in the bar is from EPG, it's only 2 grams. So maybe when somebody's getting over 25 grams of EPG may cause digestive distress, according to this old article. But when you start to think about it, like, okay, that's a pretty big dose, especially when a bar might only have 2 grams. Again, I don't think this GI distress is as much of a concern. So yeah, I mean, it's been tested. It's been tested in human consumption studies up to 150 grams a day. And so there's no real upper limit established by the FDA that people have to stay under. It's non-carcinogenic, it's non-irritating, it does not deplete the fat-soluble vitamins, as I mentioned, doesn't limit their absorption, no reproductive or developmental effects. I mean, so it has been well tested, seems very safe, and seems to provide a good alternative to lowering calories in products. Why David Barr acquired it, I would assume that they're doing well enough that they were looking at their supply chain, from what I kind of glean offline, to buy the company that manufactures this key ingredient. And I guess the drama potentially around it is that these other companies, Kate mentioned Nick's ice cream bars or these chocolates, that they might bring forth some antitrust cases because it's this fear that the David Barr is creating a monopoly around the ingredient. I don't know. That's above me to know whether or not that's a legit lawsuit or whether or not this is just fair business. But that seems to be the drama, that, David Barr has taken kind of total control of this ingredient. And I'm sure that they're going to use it to their advantage and not worry about their competitors. But from an ingredient safety point of view, it seems totally fine.
Okay, cool. I was wondering if the drama was about the actual EPG, but it doesn't seem like it.
Doesn't seem to be. It seems the other companies are worried that they're not going to be able to use this ingredient anymore. And of course, in these processed foods that have all these ingredients, there's these really specific formulations of using this exact amount and of all of these different additives. And because it's what creates that really addictive mouthfeel that we've talked about before, and the texture and the presentations of the foods, that I can imagine once you have a successful formulation, we should say, of a processed food, the last thing you want to know is one of your key ingredients, especially that's going to alter something like calories or fat grams, is going away. So I'm sure they're not pleased at all. The competitors are not pleased at all.
Got it. Okay, let's move on to our second question. This one's from Michelle. Do you think different bodies benefit from different types of exercise? A recent in-body scan shows I have above average lean muscle mass, but also above average fat. I lift weights 4 to 5 times a week and walk. I know fat loss would be all about diet, but I wonder if my focus is wrong somewhere. I'm 46 and really struggling with fat loss. I don't really need to build more muscle. Would cardio and HIIT help, or is it really all diet?
Yeah, I mean, I think, just to answer that first question succinctly, I think different bodies all benefit from different types of exercise. And there's really a couple ideas that I want to kind of pull on here. The first is, it's not all diet. Certainly exercise does contribute to your caloric burn by way of that exercise session, but also by increasing muscle mass, then you'll burn more calories throughout the day. But I do think, especially in Michelle's case, she's already exercising regularly, that you're going to be better served by focusing your diet than just focusing on how to better split up my exercise sessions. The problem with just focusing on more exercise or doing more HIIT or something like that is generally what happens is your appetite responds to exercising more by being more hungry. So a lot of times when people just add in more exercise, they just eat back more calories. And so they stay really in the same place in terms of their body composition. And so when I hear stuff like this, and this type of question is very common, I just see it as, wow, you're doing all of this work and you're so consistent with your exercise. Like, let's just put the effort on the diet at this time, right? Let's not fiddle with the optimizing of the workout routine and get the diet dialed in. And, we don't have to do the 1,200 calories a day. Don't expect to lose 2 pounds a week. Let's do something sustainable like my 3 pillars method. But instead of, worrying about the exercise, which is going so well, let's jump into the diet that might be a key missing piece. Okay, the second thing though, and this is, I think, just kind of in response to some trends that I see on social media, Now, before I get into it, I do want to preface it with the concept that we've talked about before. All exercise is better than none. So please keep that in mind, that optimal workout routines are not better if you don't do them. And there's a lot of benefit, again, a lot of benefit in any workout routine, even when it's a not optimal, in quotes, workout routine. But I do think there's this really interesting trend in the over 40 women demographic. Maybe it's because of all the perimenopause and menopause influencers. I don't know. I don't follow them. But it seems to be there's this push, especially towards women, to only focus on resistance training and walking. And it's a little bit of this, what we've talked about before, that high intensity is bad and like might increase your cortisol, or high intensity causes belly fat because it might increase cortisol, or all this silly stuff. It might also be just sort of this pendulum swing that we had so much of the cardio only focus in the 80s that now we're like focusing on resistance training. But I bring this up because cardiovascular disease is the top killer for women in the US. It kills more women than all forms of cancer combined. So doing cardio, even doing HIIT, high intensity training, or CrossFit style training, is going to be a more powerful preventative form of exercise than resistance training or walking for cardiovascular disease. Why? Well, like we just talked a lot about stressors in the last podcast with the comfort crisis, but that stress on the heart of pumping more blood, turning over more oxidants, delivering more nutrients, keeps the arteries pliable, not stiff. It helps prevent the heart from having heart failure. It helps keep our blood pressure low. All of these side benefits of doing cardio. And so I'm not saying this to encourage Michelle to jump into the cardio for the weight loss. I do think that she should kind of focus on the diet for that. But I do think she should add cardio just because it's good for you. I don't really believe that people need to do resistance training 4 to 5 times a week. Now, I'm sure the devil is in the details here. How are we defining resistance training? But I do think that 2 days is plenty if we're talking about kind of the heavy, low rep range, really pushing to fatigue. And then after that, I think 1 to 2 days a week of CrossFit or HIIT style training, which yes, might have some weights in it, but I wouldn't really call it resistance training, is the next place to go. And then 1 to 2 days a week after that for longer cardio, which is all different than walking, which might be like, 40 minutes on the bike, or intervals with the rower and the bike, or running and, I don't know, light air, body weight air squats, something like that. Now, if I say that schedule of kind of the 1 to 2 days of resistance training, the 1 to 2 days of CrossFit and HIIT, and the 1 to 2 days of longer cardio totally overwhelms you because you don't have the time, we just want to go back to what I said before, and there's huge value in regular exercise even when it's not optimal. But in cases where I have somebody who's already consistently working out 5 days a week, I wouldn't put it all in the resistance training bucket. There are the adaptations from cardio and HIIT that you do not get from resistance training and walking. And so yes, bringing it back to the first thing I said in the very beginning, different bodies all benefit from different types of exercise.
Take it. Question 3 is from Gail. This is about a Gary Brecka video when he was on the Joe Rogan podcast. It's him explaining about folic acid, which is added to many processed foods, and that 40% of the population has a gene mutation which doesn't allow them to process it, and then links it to ADHD and the mind being, quote unquote, amped up.
Yeah, and basically wanted my take on this, and I think the first take is ignore Gary Brecka. Seriously,
that's the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, he's got, I just checked on Instagram, 2.6 million followers. I'm not sure what he said that's correct, and it's really hard. I haven't found a lot of good nutritionists with over 1 million followers, and I think part of the reason that's the case is it's really hard to gain a large following preaching the basics that work. I know Lane Norton is now over 1 million. I think that's great. But so many of these people that I get questions about when I look, it's like they have these huge followings, but they really aren't saying anything that's accurate. Real nutritionists, real PhD evidence-based work aren't giving out all this fear-mongering stuff that catches attention. So I don't know much about Gary Brecka in terms of his credentials. So I went to his website to see what his educations and credentials are. And before I got to the, about me section or whatever, the landing page has 4 things that will change your life. And they are sunlight, breath work, cold water, and grounding. LOL. He's out of touch with what people actually need to improve their health. Now, when I did get to anything about him, I didn't actually see any credentials. They could have been left off, but it does sound like he went from the insurance industry to a self-taught biohacker. I mean, it doesn't really seem like he's in tune with truly what is evidence-based, and I think he has all this following and this influence because he says stuff that's attention-getting. Remember, we're in the attention economy, not the accuracy economy. So this video, though, if I did watch it, it talks about the gene mutation in an enzyme called methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase, also known as the MTHFR gene. And this does regulate our processing of folate, which is vitamin B9. Now, in the video, Gary says that 40 to 60% of the population has this gene mutation, and it prevents them from being able to convert a form of folate called folic acid, as you mentioned, from being converted into its more useful form called methylfolate. Now, folic acid is the synthetic form of the vitamin folate, and it's used in supplements, but it is also used to fortify our foods. So Gary goes on to explain that all of our processed foods, like grain-based foods such as our breads and cereals and, Pop-Tarts or whatever else, grain-based snack food, has been fortified with folic acid. And then most people have this gene mutation and they can't actually convert it to the useful form. And so this is then the cause of our mind being amped up, aka ADHD, anxiety, all of our health woes. There we go. Mm-hmm. So this is where it's going to get into a little bit of he said, she said, in that we don't have any evidence that what he's claiming is true. Yes, the synthetic form of folate is folic acid, but that's sort of where the truth ends. Mm-hmm. Those with the MTHFR mutation can process folic acid, so he gets that wrong. And then a lot of the reason actually why processed foods are fortified with folic acid is not because the government is trying to kill you and give everybody ADHD, is because it actually helps us prevent neural tube birth defects. And this is all clearly outlined on the CDC website. Now, some gene mutations of the MTHFR gene have been associated with higher risks of different health conditions, but this is true with everything. Everybody has higher or lower risks of cancer, cardiovascular disease, obesity, you name it, based on genetics. So that's not that surprising, but we don't have the evidence to say that this gene mutation is causing that outcome at this point, or that it has anything to do with fortified foods with folic acid. And this is what's so tiring about, content creation from my point of view, is that these biohackers make these really wild claims without any evidence. And then everyone else is sort of stuck trying to debunk it with real evidence. And it's exhausting. They can just come out and say these wild things like unicorns are real. And then we're grasping at straws to be oh, no, let me look up PubMed and figure out how to show that this is not real, Yep. So yeah, I think the first rule of thumb is ignore Gary Brecka. But secondly, be wary of when people have this one thing will fix everything. This one gene mutation is the main cause of ADHD and anxiety, and no one told me about it until I saw it from a biohacker on a big podcast. That's when you have to kind of catch yourself a little bit. And I get it. I don't think the government gets everything right. I don't think, quote, our experts get everything right. But the idea that a self-taught biohacker has figured out the single cause of these really big, complex problems that have both genetic and environmental influencers like ADHD and anxiety, you just kind of have to pull yourself back and whoa, I'm getting sucked into the crazy. And look, I got sucked into the crazy for years, so I understand how it can be done. But that's the thing that I think you really got to kind of catch yourself, finding out about, some secret health hack on a big podcast. No.
Not the way to go.
No.
All right, let's go to question 4. This is from Brandon. This is what he asks. Are there any studies that show that hiding the amount of weight someone is lifting has an effect on their progress? Interesting. I've noticed that when I'm lifting, if I increase the weight by even 2.5 pounds, mentally, I've just told myself that it is heavier and it feels more difficult. I often wondered, what if I don't know the weight had just been increased and just assumed it was the same weight? Would I be able to lift more if I was able to hide the amount of weight I was training with? Another example is that I started turning off the quote-unquote miles run notification in my running app. I found that the last 2 miles are always so hard because I know I am close to finishing my run, and so I should be feeling tired. But now that I no longer know how long I've run, I've discovered I often am surprised when I've hit my distance goal, like there is still juice in the tank. I don't know if there are juice tanks, Brandon, but I think maybe gas in the tank.
I'd like a juice tank.
My kids would love a juice tank.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so I haven't found research exactly on what Brandon is suggesting. I do think there are some ethical concerns here when he was giving the example of the weights, like not really knowing the weight that you're going to lift. A big thing with research is like, are you lying to your test subjects about what they're going through? And certainly you can imagine, 2.5 pounds won't do it, but you can certainly imagine that kind of having some unknown weight on the bar could also be putting your test subjects at risk to some degree if you're lying, right? So I do think some of this stuff of when we want to get into, I don't know if we'll call it like mind tricks, something like that, that does come with some potentially some ethical concerns when we're looking at the research. Now, I will say that there was a really well-known, or is a really well-known YouTuber who did this exact experiment. Now, it was a very small experiment. They just took 3 individuals and they told them they were going to lift their 5-rep max in the deadlift, back squat, and bench press. And then the YouTuber, he kind of like had them wear these glasses and walk them out blindfold and stuff like that. And then the YouTuber ended up loading the bar with their either true 5-rep max or 10 pounds higher or 10 pounds lower. But the lifter didn't know which permutation they got. And it did turn out that the person whose bar was loaded with 10 pounds heavier and they thought it was their 5-rep max was actually able to make the lift. So it sort of shows this idea that, okay, sometimes if you don't know what the weight is in the bar, you'll still be able to lift it. But I didn't really find anything, let's say, in the PubMed research on this. I think what you're going to find in the research that's as close that we can get to this is stuff on the placebo effect. And we've talked about this in prior podcasts. We'll put the link in the show notes. It's the beta-alanine and belief episode. But there was this really cool study by Raglan in 2020, and they reported that in their review of placebo studies, that the benefits of a placebo and sports performance ranged from detracting performance or decreasing performance by 2% to improving performance up to 50%, which is insane. But most of the placebo effects were falling between 1% and 5%. And so if your back squat is 150 pounds and you're going to put 5 total more pounds on the bar, that's only a 3% increase. You're well within the possibility of a placebo effect. So even if you're just thinking, okay, I don't know what you're told, that maybe, if you listen to this music before you lift, you're going to be stronger, or maybe you don't know that the weights are on the bar and you're just going to go for the same lift again, that you have the very real potential that you are just going to be able to lift that because of the belief that it's the same weight or whatever other placebo effect could be. You're just, in a good mood, or you took some new supplement or whatever it is. Now, also, I do remember from the comfort crisis, which we actually just talked about, there was a statement in there about some research that some Brazilian researchers found that those who could dissociate their emotions were able to perform better. I did try to track down the references on that one. I didn't actually see it called out, and I was going to actually write into Michael Easter, but the response time, he said, is 2 weeks plus, which we didn't have time for this podcast. But so I couldn't actually track down whether or not you're able to kind of tell yourself that it's not that bad or it's not that hard could lead to performance outcomes. But I will say, and I did come across some research, there's definitely influence of your thoughts on your outcome in sports performance. That if you add weight and you tell yourself, gosh, this is heavier, you are less likely to be successful. And with your run app, if you're constantly checking all the time, hoping to be done, it's more likely going to feel like it's dragging on forever. So generally trying to adapt a neutral, if not positive mindset about the task at hand is generally going to lead to better outcomes. And there certainly is research on that. I do want to point out, though, there is a limit to our physical prowess. There's no amount of positive thinking that's going to get me to a 5-minute mile. There's no amount of positive thinking that's going to get me personally to a 300-pound back squat. So this is where we do also run into our physical limits, such that it's not just mental belief of like, oh, this is going to go well, that sometimes things are heavier or difficult because they truly are heavier or more difficult. And so this is where performance is such a great example of my principle that it's never one thing. That yes, there's going to be some mental aspect of it. Yes, we have to kind of have the belief that we can do it. Yes, positive thinking helps. But then we also have to actually have some physical capacity to be able to complete the task.
What I do is I have in my garage gym here, I have a mix of kilo plates and pound plates, and I just refuse to do math while I'm back squatting or deadlifting. And so I just have to just feel it out. And at the end of it, I pull out a calculator. I'm like, okay, how do I do this? So that's how I trick myself into lifting more, is I just literally don't know what's on there.
Yeah, that will help. Kilo plates are definitely tough for us in the States.
All right, last question we've got is from Rachel. This is what she sent over. I recently signed up for a series of fitness classes that are run by a CrossFit coach in my neighborhood. She also sends out nutrition advice as part of her program. She really pushes food sequencing, or eating foods in a certain order: veggies first, then fruit, then protein, then fat, then carbs. Have you already done a podcast episode on this topic? It seems like there is worse dietary advice out there. And I get that she's encouraging people to eat more fruits and vegetables, which is good. But from a quick internet search, I wasn't able to find a lot of research behind eating this way.
Yeah, so I don't totally know the rationale for why this coach is recommending the food sequencing rules. I have a guess, and we're certainly going to touch on that. But I do want to point out some of the good things about this first, and Rachel already identified it. Yeah, it's encouraging more fruit and vegetable consumption, which of course I love. And one of the things that's going to happen when you eat more fruits and vegetables, especially first, is that we're typically going to see a reduction in the total quantity of the meal, because they're so low in calories, but yet they're so filling, right? They've got so much water, they've got so much fiber, you're going to eat all these fruits and veggies, and then you're ultimately going to probably eat less bread, chips, cookies, etc. And so that's really a big part or aspect of the 800-gram challenge. I think the nuance with the 800-gram challenge is I don't make people eat things in a certain order. That, yeah, they've got to have this 800 grams in a day or whatever their sustainable number is, but it's not like they have to eat the apple before the turkey breast or whatever. But, you know, and that kind of gets into one of the reasons that I really dislike something like food sequencing rules, because to me it either creates A, weird food neuroses or disordered eating, or B, if it doesn't create kind of weird neuroses, I think what happens is that people feel like they've failed the diet and it won't work if they don't follow the rules specifically. So there's this thing like, oh shoot, I messed up my food sequencing today, so now my diet's totally ruined, so now I'll just sort of eat whatever. And so I think those are a lot of the problems here. Now, I think a lot of the food sequencing advice or recommendations out there are in attempts to reduce the glucose spike after a meal. And I think we all can thank eye roll here for people not watching on YouTube, the glucose goddess, for carrying the torch forward on this disordered eating trend. But, you know, contrary to her messaging, your blood glucose is not supposed to be level and flat all day. It's supposed to go up and back down in healthy individuals. Again, healthy individuals have glucose spikes, that blood glucose and insulin goes up and back down. That is normal. That is healthy. The going up can become problematic if you're eating too much, but just going up in and of itself is not a problem. And so I find people have developed this obsession with no spiking of your glucose, no spiking of insulin, when the reality is, again, healthy people spike their glucose and insulin. And so I think that's kind of a big problem with this mantra, is it develops this neuroses around you're hurting your health if you're going to do things out of order. I also think the goal of nutrition coaches or nutritionists should be to create the least restrictions or rules for their clients as possible. Because the more rules you have, this kind of gets into my second point, the more likely they're going to be broken just due to the chaos of life and all of the different variables that go on each day. The more likely someone's going to quit because they, quote, can't do the diet. When in reality, you can eat things in any order and still be healthy, still be insulin sensitive, still lose weight, insert your goal of choice. Like, it does not matter what foods you eat them in. Sometimes maybe you might even want to mix your food together on the plate. Sometimes you might want to have a little bite of an apple between your bites of turkey or whatever the order, quote, should be.
Easy.
I know, blasphemy, right? So some of the things that I think a lot of experts online, you know, experts in terms of the physiology or wellness influencers online, that they miss in terms of nutrition, and I have to admit, I think I missed this as well for some time, is that you have to actually enjoy your diet plan to stick to it. There's just this idea, even if the physiology arguments were correct about blood glucose spiking, which they're not, but if they were, you still have to enjoy your diet to stick to the plan. And so people really kind of lose that and just think that, okay, well, they're just going to follow these perfect rules to get the perfect number of calories and the perfect number of macros ratio or whatever it might be, when in reality, all of those rules make the diet less enjoyable. So I think it's okay to explain to your clients, hey, fruits and veggies have a low caloric density. And hey, if you were to prioritize fruits and veggies, that's going to help fill you up and you might eat less overall. But give them that information of how it's actually working instead of potentially telling them that this is the only way to do it or this is a way to get the best health outcome you want. And I have a feeling that this food sequencing idea is being promoted more under the guise of this junk science blood glucose thing than necessarily just trying to encourage people to eat more fruits and vegetables.
Got it. It's a good episode when we can mention Gary Brecka and the glucose goddess. It's a good episode.
Really hitting those top influencers. Yep.
Easy. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody who sends us questions, those in this episode, in previous, and of course in future episodes. Get on EC's newsletter list, hit reply to any of those, submit your questions. We'll do our best to get them into a future episode. Also, make sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you're listening or watching so you don't miss another one. EC and I will be back next week for a brand new episode of the Consistency Project podcast.